Hey, what's going on, B-Wood? We are in our final week of our series called Back to the Future. We're talking about how traveling between the past and the present can really help us in the future. Now, you probably, in our lifetime, we probably will never, ever experience the opportunity to time travel in order to save someone's life. But here's what I want you to do as we close out this series today. Here's a couple things that I want you to consider. Number one is this: if you could change the future, what would you change? Would you change something that benefited you? Or would you change something that benefited the needs of others? And if you did something for the needs of others, would you still do it even if you never got the credit? You see, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 through 5, we're going to be talking about here the story. You see, we as humans, we've always been obsessed with ourselves, our own reputation, for as long as humanity has existed. But even back in the Bible times, when Jesus was around, the religious people especially struggled with this. They even found a way how to make prayer about themselves. Matthew chapter 6, verse 1 through 5, and then we're also going to be reading 16 through 18. It says this: be careful when you do something good. Don't do it in front of others so that they will see you. If you do that, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to those who are poor, don't announce it that you're giving. Don't be like the hypocrites when they are in the synagogues and the churches or in the streets. They blow trumpets before they give so that people will see them. They want everybody to praise them. The truth is, that's the only reward that they're actually going to get. So when you give to the poor, don't let anybody know what you're doing. You should be doing that in private. Your Father can see what is done in private, and he will reward you. But when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites. They love to stand in the synagogues, the churches, and on the street corners and pray loudly. They want people to see them. The truth is, that's the only reward they will get. Now, if we jump down a couple verses to verse 16, it says, when you fast, don't make it about yourselves or look sad like the hypocrites. They put on the suffering on their faces so that people will see that they're fasting. The truth is, that's the only reward that they will get. When you fast, wash your face, make yourself look nice. Then no one will know that you're fasting except your Father in heaven, who is with you, even in private. He can see what is done in private, and he will reward you. So, for most of you, if you've been around church any amount of time, you kind of know what prayer is. It's how we bring our requests to God. But in case you're unfamiliar, fasting is kind of like an advanced form of prayer. When people are really serious about asking God for something, they might fast or they might abstain from something while they pray. This is sometimes it can be food, but you can fast a lot of things. You can fast your video games, you can fast your phone, you can fast Netflix, you can fast, whatever. There's multiple things that you can fast. Coffee, if you're a coffee drinker, if you're a donut lover, if you love sweets, you could fast fast food, Whataburger. So when you fast, you're basically saying, hey, God, I'm really serious. I need you to listen so that you can help me. Now, in these scriptures, Jesus mentions 3 spiritual disciplines in the passages. He talks about prayer, he talks about fasting, and he talks about giving to those in need. Now, all of these disciplines are supposed to give you this greater sense of dependence on God. But the people here, they were misusing them. They were giving, they were praying, and they were fasting, but not to connect with God because they wanted the attention. They wanted to seem extra spiritual. You see, let me break it down to you like this. What they were doing was basically this. They were getting ready to pray, and all of a sudden they'd walk out on the street outside the church and into the streets, and they would look around and then they would boldly scream, hello, everybody. Just want to let you know that it's Ruben here, and I'm getting ready to pray to God because that's what I do. I'm about to pray boldly to my God as I walk these streets because I'm a holy person. They wanted all the attention. It took that intimacy away from being with God. And there came times in their lives when they were fasting and they would go to someone's house and they were making food, and rather than just say, no, I'm not hungry, or no, thank you, they would make it about themselves. No, I can't eat today. My life is full of a life of fasting, and I'm fasting food, and I'm not able to eat today, but go ahead and eat because I'm spiritual and I'm choosing not to eat. You see, they wanted people to be impressed by them. And so Jesus goes on, he basically calls them this. He says, listen, you hypocrites, you're doing many of the right things, but you've forgotten why you were supposed to do them. And that wasn't the first time that this happened in history. You see, in Isaiah chapter 58, verse 3 through 9, we see another portion of this happening. But let me ask you this. Do you have a favorite quote or a favorite scripture? You see, we have different quotes that we live by. For me, I have one that says, for I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I mean, that's kind of the quote that I live by. Some of these quotes, they can make us laugh. Some of these quotes are motivational. But whatever your favorite quote is, I'm guessing that it has something to do with who you are and what's important to you. That's why they're your favorite. So when Jesus was here on earth, he would often make it a point to quote people of prophets, of spiritual leaders. And over the past couple weeks, we've been talking about quotes that Jesus did. It's people from Isaiah to Jeremiah to Amos. And he let everyone know who he was and what mattered to him. So even when Jesus wasn't directly quoting the prophets or anybody like that, his teachings would have sounded very familiar to people who knew what the prophets had written. So for hundreds of years before Jesus spoke the words that we just read, the prophet Isaiah called people out of their selfishness as well. You see, they had been praying and fasting, but God wasn't answering the prayers the way they wanted. And so here's what it is that they said in Isaiah chapter 58, verse 3 through 9. It says, why have you fasted, they said, and not have seen it? Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? Yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all our workers. Your fasting ends in quarreling and strife and striking each other with wicked fists. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. This is the kind of fast I've chosen. I have chosen only a day for people to humble themselves. Is it only for bowing one's head like a reed and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Is it that you will call a fast a day acceptable to the Lord? Is it not the kind of fast that I have chosen to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and to break every yoke? It is not to share your food. Is it not to share your food with the hungry and to provide the poor wanderer with shelter? When you see them naked, you clothe them. You do not turn away from your own flesh and blood. Then your light will break forth in the dawn and the healing will quickly appear. Then your righteousness will go before you and the glory of the Lord will be your guard. And then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, here am I. You see, in these verses, Jesus is angry, just like Jesus. Isaiah is angry at the way God's people were abusing prayer and fasting. You see, in this case, God's people, they weren't giving to those that were in need. They were using prayer and fasting as a way to boss people around. They thought that if they fasted and prayed in all the right ways, that God would be obligated to give them what it is that they wanted. You see, but Isaiah simply tells them, he says, listen here, stop thinking about yourselves for a minute. Stop thinking about yourself and remember what God has called them to do. You see, God has called them to stop taking advantage of others. He's called us to loosen chains of injustice, set the oppressed free, share what you have, take care of people who are without food, shelter, and clothing. You see, when we choose sacrifice and justice rather than selfishness and injustice, Isaiah says that God will hear our prayers and will shine like light in the darkness. The first week we talked about the mission of Jesus. We began when he talked about his ministry on earth, he quoted the same prophet Isaiah and he began to announce his purpose. And his purpose was this. His purpose was to set people free. Jesus came to set people free spiritually, but not only but that's not the only kind of freedom Jesus came for. You see, when Jesus and Isaiah were talking about meeting the needs of others and clothing the naked and feeding the hungry, it's not a metaphor that they were talking about. They meant that literally. When we participate in the mission of Jesus, it's not only about helping people believe in Jesus to find eternal life. It's about meeting their physical needs during this life too. When we become justice seekers working for the good of others, God can use us to change the future. And if you want to join in on the mission that Jesus has, you'll need to remember this. You'll need to remember the words of the prophets and Jesus. You'll need to remember the way Jesus set you free when you first met him. And you'll need to remember the way Jesus continues to set you free from the things that try to hold you captive. You see, that mission isn't about you, your reputation, your ego, but how do we turn back time to change the future? How do we do the impossible without this magic time turner? We do it by remembering the mission. So as we close out this series, week 4, Jesus calls us to remember the mission that he set out for us. The same thing that God has called himself to do, he's calling us to do. So will you remember the mission that Jesus did?